Ivy and Devon to come up. Come on up. Did you figure out your... Oh, it's on a cell phone, isn't it? Oh, that's modern times. We've had plenty of readings off of cell phones here at the Center for Sex and Culture. Ivy Anderson and Devon Angus and the story of Alice.
I hate that we have to use the phone. Sorry, guys, but our printer totally crapped out, so bear with us.
The book isn't out yet, so we can't read it from the book. Anyway.
Book party, though. Yes.
Anyway, so the book, Alice, Memoirs of a Barbary Coast Prostitute, it's coming out October 2nd, and we're having a book award ceremony at Heyday Books, at the California Historical Society, October 27th, and we'll have a conversation with SWAP, members from SWAP. It'll be fantastic. We are going to read our preface, which I think gives an idea of what the book's about and kind of our personal relationship with it. And then, so how the book is structured is that we have a foreword by Josh Sides, who's author of Erotic San Francisco. And then we have a preface, and then we have an incredibly long, but I think interesting introduction, 70-page introduction that really deals with the history and issues surrounding this memoir of a prostitute from 1913. And then we have Alice's memoirs themselves, along with 12 different letters by working-class women and sex workers that wrote into the paper. So we're going to read the preface, I'm going to read the preface, and then Ivy will read 2 of these letters to give you sort of a taste. When we began researching the story behind A Voice from the Underworld, we were startled and delighted to discover that there was hardly a trace of it on the internet. Particularly here in the tech capital of the world, we are bombarded with the idea that everything worth knowing and doing is accessible through the colloquial touch of a button. From a cab ride to a new romance, we purportedly can find everything we want and more in the massive data network. Take that away, however, and you open yourself to a different kind of possibility, the possibility of discovering something new, discovering something not already accessible to anyone on the planet with an internet connection. Finding a voice from the underworld after hours holed up behind the screen of a microfilm reader is confirmation of this belief. There are hundreds of books about the history of San Francisco, a handful about the history of sex work in America at the turn of the 20th century, and even a few volumes on the history of the San Francisco Bulletin newspaper. But up until now, the unique document titled A Voice from the Underworld existed only on a few pieces of microfilm, thankfully archived in a library. It is in this analog world of fragile reels and dusty old equipment that the act of pure discovery still awaits, despite the pervading belief that everything has already been cataloged on Wikipedia. Our hunt for the narrator, Alice Smith, began with a love of outlaw literature and a fascination with Fremont Older, the enigmatic editor of the San Francisco Bulletin, who gained fame as a vitriolic crusader during the graft trials of the first decade of the 20th century, but soon after suffered an existential turnabout, becoming a Dostoevskian champion of the downtrodden. Our love of Jack Black's underworld autobiography, You Can't Win, that's not the actor, by the way. It's a fantastic book. You Can't Win, originally published by Older, led us to the many other memoirs of merit that were serialized in the Bulletin, and through them we began to see Older as an early link to a distinct form of California literature, which, like Steinbeck's Cannery Row, Bukowski's Factotum, or Didion's White Album, aims to dignify and scrutinize the full sociological diversity of human life. The candid tales of poverty and vice published in the Bulletin contain a kernel of the old soul of San Francisco. And even as tech money sweeps away more of the SROs, free clinics, dive bars, diners, and taquerias that have made this city livable for many in the lower economic rungs of society, Fremont Older's appeals to the diverse class of San Francisco are not only still relevant for a modern audience, but absolutely necessary to revisit. While You Can't Win has become a cult classic, A Voice from the Underworld curiously remained lost for more than 100 years. We can't explain why or how that happened, but once we saw reference to it in Older's own autobiography, we knew we wanted to know more. The mention of a prostitute's memoir in turn-of-the-century San Francisco sent us into a research frenzy. One early online reference we found placed the publication of the story in 1917, a date we knew must be wrong because by that time, Older was wrapped up in the defense of radical labor activists Thomas Mooney and Warren K. Billings, California's own Sacco and Vanzetti, who were framed for the bombing of a pro-war parade as the United States prepared to enter into the Great War. In search of the original document, we settled in San Francisco Main Library's 5th floor, split up the reels of microfilm, and began scanning forward from 1911 until, in June 1913, a voice from the underworld emerged on the screen. It was itself an eye-opening piece of journalism, but adding to its impact were the published letters from hundreds of women reacting to the serialized memoir. Women writing candidly about being women, about sex, labor, crime, politics. More than 4,000 letters were received by the Bulletin on the subject, and nearly 300 were published in the paper. Of those, 114 were written by women who said they were or had been themselves sex workers, and 30 were by working-class women who at one point in their lives considered turning to sex work. We knew we had stumbled upon something of critical importance. The question of authenticity is a significant one for historians. We hope to find the raw material of Alice's memoirs and the many letters written to the Bulletin in some magical archive tied up with a bow, but of course, tracking down history rarely works that way. The Bulletin, following Fremont Older's firing in 1919, appears to have cleaned house before its eventual purchase by the Hearst-owned San Francisco Call. As far as we know, the original source material simply doesn't exist. Because of the Bulletin's history as a sensationalist publication, not to mention our own doubts, as well as the doubts of academics we consulted, we wondered if we could find a definitive record of Alice Smith. There were a few brief descriptions of her by Fremont Older himself, a fuller description by newspaper editorialist John Barry, published during the serial, and a later recollection by newspaperman R.L. Duffus, written in 1960. Other than that, we had little to go on. In the spring of 2015, we drove down from San Francisco into the Santa Cruz Mountains to visit Wood Hills, Fremont Older's home, which also served as a bohemian salon and failed cooperative. Standing with the rest of the history buffs there to tour the property, we noticed an old guest book in the living room. Ignoring the docent's talk, we consumed the pages, photographing and taking notes on this simple book that had somehow escaped the archives. There we found a remarkable list of visitors to Wood Hills spanning decades, including Clarence Darrow, Lincoln Steffens, Carl Sandburg, Emma Goldman, Alexander Berkman, David Starr Jordan, James Rolfe, Hiram Johnson, and many others from the world of letters and politics. Among the names of such luminaries, however, were a great deal of names unknown to us, a testament to Older's habit of mixing company of all types. He hosted regular dinners, bringing together, in his words, world savers, economists, psychics, ex-prisoners, fortune tellers, insane people, underworld characters, and religious fanatics, which kind of sounds like San Francisco right there, doesn't it? If the real Alice Smith or Alma Green or Violet Brown or any of the other letter writers who may or may not have used their actual names was amongst those listed in the guest book, we had no way of knowing. Our failure to corroborate Alice's existence might very well suggest that her ghost-written memoir is at best a composite portrait of multiple women, if not pure fiction. Certainly, the content of the era suggests as much. Salacious exposés and white slave narratives of dubious authenticity, most of them written by vice reformers and editors looking to capitalize on public hysteria over prostitution, flooded the nation's media. On the other hand, as you'll read in our introduction to this volume, Older's career in the years preceding A Voice from the Underworld might suggest a different conclusion, which we invite you to consider. In any case, over the course of our research, we have realized that the obsession over finding the real Alice Smith borders on delicate ethical territory. It is challenging as historians, as passionate as we are about evidence gathering, to work with documents where anonymity is the norm. Sex workers throughout history have donned pseudonyms not just as a performative choice, but as a safety mechanism to protect themselves and their families from abuse and criminal charges. Even today, sex worker narratives are often cast off as unworthy of serious consideration because of the continued use of pen names. And yet, many of these documents, whether essays, memoirs, letters, news articles, or interviews by, with, or about contemporary sex workers, deserve our attention, even as they allow their narrators to protect themselves. In readings of many of these works, we have uncovered a salient detail about the urge to find Alice. Perhaps society's readiness to cast off as invalid the stories from anonymous sex workers is but one more way in which the public refuses to relate to them as fellow humans, as if simple disconnection from their given names reinforces the tradition of diminishing their personhood. As much as we hope to find evidence of the real Alice, we did not want to fall into invasive, voyeuristic territory by obsessing over her identity, nor could we with good conscience cast aside her story despite questions of her existence as a single, verifiable person. Whoever Alice Smith was or wasn't, we strive here to preserve the integrity of her voice. The project has defined both of our lives for the last few years, and any editorial decisions were made. We don't have to get into all of that. One last paragraph talking about these letters. We would have liked to include every one of the letters sent into the bulletin in response to A Voice from the Underworld, but would have made this book of impossible length and weight. Instead, we have selected 12 of the letters written by women in response to Alice's story. While the bulletin did publish a number of letters written by men, including local politicians, philosophers, and clergy, these letters are notably missing here, since it is relatively easy to find other documentation of powerful men discussing prostitution in the progressive era. We also believe that this choice remains true to the original intent of the bulletin, which aimed to elevate the voices of the voiceless. We hope that by emphasizing the stories of the bulletin's most marginalized readers, we will also honor them, their courage, and the courage of contemporary sex workers who struggle to be taken seriously in a world that pushes them so shamefully into exile. I want to note, too, that we actually wrote the preface and the introduction together, which is an interesting experiment, but we've blended our two voices for what it's worth.
I'll read one of the letters, and if I have time, maybe two, but just one. Okay. So let's see. Bear with me for just one moment. Let me pull it up. This is one of the most striking of the letters from a sex worker at that time. In my opinion, that when we first read it, just felt so contemporary that it was insane to imagine that it had been written, over 100 years ago. Sorry, just getting to it. Here we are. Okay. It's titled, "Is It Our Fault?" asks this woman, "that we are the world's misfits?" Editor of the Bulletin, I've read the letters and articles about A Voice from the Underworld and would like to say something on it as a member of it. I do not agree with the good people who try to help us without knowing anything about our conditions, and I do not agree with the people who condemn us. Society always seems ready to kick us about. Is it our fault that we do not fit into their ready-made molds? We are the misfits in the world, and I think you must recast the molds before trying to solve this problem. You like to save us. Pray, why do you not save the factory girl who works from 8 to 12 hours a day for a mere pittance? She ruins herself just as quickly, in body, as we do. And many of us have escaped the industrial brothels and prefer not to return. True, life here is miserable, but we have solved our problem in the underworld individually and do not have to fear unemployment and hunger. Unemployment is a menace. Why does not society solve that? It is surely a greater problem than prostitution. Does society want us now, after putting us through the mill, to return to the $5 work week, scale, compete with our sisters who cling to their virtue dreams and wear calico dresses? Do not condemn the men who patronize us. They too are not all bad. Many are not what the world calls successful. They would not be accepted by society as fit to marry my daughter. Many a girl has met here afterward the fellow she once rejected. Some of these men seem to be so strangely isolated from all feminine acquaintance. I know many who do not know and have never had a chance to meet a single decent woman or girl in all their life. They perforce come to us. They long for companionship, and we earn quite a few dollars in this way, strange as it may seem. Please do not take this as a mere guess. I know it as an absolute, undisputed fact. Your dance halls, your lodges, picnics, etc. do not reach all men, and there is a large class of these men everywhere to be found. Big cities have thousands of them. Decent girls, decent society do not care to meet them, so we are the only ones that are in the reach of their pocketbook and their leisure. We often know them very intimately, and many of them are splendid fellows in character, but the stigma that society has cast against us prevents them from forming a marriage bond. Let us alone as long as you do not want us. Let us live our lives as best we can. We are not always inmates of the red light district. Society drove us here, and it is not Christian to inflict on us more punishment for society's crime. Society's constant persecution forces us to bribe officials, preachers, etc. We are forced to do this. Society forces us to do it. Self-preservation is the supreme law. Why does society condemn us when, through its clumsy methods, it forces us to apply this law? Life is life, and in self-defense, all methods are fair. I hope these lines will help the outworld to understand the underworld. It is seldom that we make an outcry to deaf ears, but perhaps the voice will not be lost this time. I do not sign a name. I too have prejudices, and anyhow, what's in a name? Thanks.
Thanks, and we have some cards with information if anyone's interested. Thank you.